Hello, welcome to Hanging on His Words. My name is Ken Heidebrecht, and you are watching Honor of Kings, Season 3, Episode 2. And I'm joined by my compadre, Sean Griffin. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
What's up, Ken? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, bud. How was your day?
It's been great, man. It's been busy so far, but I'm excited to jump into the Apocalypse of Baruch and start testing this book with you. And looks like we've already got quite a few people in the chat waiting for us to test it with them as well. So this is
Yes, absolutely.
Do you hear a slight delay, Ken?
Yeah, there's a slight delay, and I just apologize at the outset there, brothers and sisters. I think there's something glitchy on my end. We've been trying to deal with it, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to endure it throughout this episode, and hopefully we'll get it dealt with for subsequent episodes. But yeah, there's a bit of a delay, Sean, but it's all good. We'll just we'll go through and do our thing here. But yeah, thank you for joining us today, guys. We really appreciate you coming back. Sean and I love this premise of this show. For those who have no idea what we're even doing here, what Honor of Kings is all about, basically, a short synopsis is we look at books that have been removed throughout time in different canons, and we read them, we study them, we put them on the screen, and we have a dialogue about them. And then I think by the end of several episodes, depending on how long we go through a certain book, we come to the determination as to whether or not something should be considered scripture, or perhaps it should be, given a thumbs down. So last episode, we went through the book of Adam and Eve, the first 10 chapters of it. And it didn't take very long, Sean, did it, to see that book has got some issues.
That's right. Yeah, we quickly started seeing some theological contradictions, and then we also ran into a failed prophecy, which is kind of rough. That immediately disqualifies a book, in our opinion, according to Deuteronomy 13, also Deuteronomy 18.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, Sean and I, we can't be people pleasers with everything. We're not out here to tickle the ears. I know that some people have reached out to me and said that we did an unsatisfactory job and seemed like we're reading the book the whole time. I apologize. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to come at this with a objective mindset, and just test it to see what it says, what it's teaching. And it's been our opinion that there are prominent teachers out there that support this book and believe that it can be used to build on doctrine and to create supporting texts for certain theories that we think that are unbiblical. So we are passionate with what we do, and when it comes to certain texts that just don't pass the test, we got to be clear cut about it. And so we just that's kind of the premise of this show, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We would hate to, and I know what you meant when you said objective, because that's our goal, is to come to this with a completely unbiased view. But at the same time, the only subjectivity we bring to this is that we're testing these things against what we do consider actual scripture already. So if we were just trying to test it against some other arbitrary standard, then it could be considered truly biased. But the only bias we have is the actual canon of 66 that we've all been reading our whole lives in the United States or the North American hemisphere, which is part of what we consider the Protestant canon of 66. So that's what we're doing, is taking these books and seeing if they line up. In order to do that, you have to know what the Protestant canon of 66 says, as far as what it teaches, to know if something contradicts theologically, or if there is a litmus test for prophecy. And that litmus test is explained in the canon of 66 in Deuteronomy. And any prophet that claims to have a prophecy of something that's going to happen and it doesn't come to pass, then that person is considered a false prophet. That work or that writing or that passage, whatever is making that claim that doesn't come to pass, and that from that point on, there's a serious problem, because they're not getting their inspiration from the Father, and therefore they shouldn't be listened to, as Deuteronomy 18 talks about. So that is the only subjectivity we do bring to this.
Exactly. And yeah, agreed. And you mentioned the Protestant canon, Sean. For those who don't know and aren't very familiar with the idea of canonization and what has existed throughout the past several hundred years, we've got different traditions across the earth. We've got the Western tradition, Eastern Orthodox tradition, the Oriental Orthodox tradition, the Syrian Eastern tradition, and even the Judaism's own tradition. And built underneath the subsets of those headings are many denominations that have their own canons. And so Sean mentioned the Protestant canon. That's the one that I grew up with here in Canada. Sean is obviously familiar with the Protestant canon as well, being in America, and a lot of our viewers are from America, but I mean, North America in general is a lot of what we see on our channels with people watching us. But that's the canon that we're used to and we've grown up with. And the common thread throughout all the canons is the first 5 books at least. And as Sean mentioned, in Deuteronomy, there's a test that's mentioned. And so that's kind of the ground, the foundation that we use to test all other books in all the other canons that have differing opinions regarding what books should be in and what should be out. So that at least we have a solid foundation of, because I don't know about you, Sean, but I've been asked, like, how do you know that the 66 books are even a good foundation to test it on? Well, at least what we call the Old Testament. And even some of those books aren't even in some canons, but that is the solid foundation on which we know we can build and look at other texts with. Am I correct in saying that, Sean?
Yeah, that's the foundation that our Messiah preached upon. So all the theological concepts and the litmus test of prophecy. And yes, our Messiah even announced prophecy that was fulfilled. And then there's other prophecies that he announced that will be fulfilled at his second coming. So yes, that's the standard that he abided by through what he called sound doctrine for teaching people not only to repent unto righteousness, but also the gospel of the kingdom of God. So that's the same standard we're trying to go by.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
All right. You want to get to the summary real quick? Because I think what we told the viewers last time is we're going to say we're actually going to do a summary of the rest or the full book of first and second book of Adam and Eve, and just highlight some large theological issues that we saw, so they can just have some finality and understanding why we claimed that one did not pass the test. And we actually have presented it in a short summary form for everybody. So let me just share that real quick. And we only have 12 points to go through real quick. And the biggest biggest one, Ken, that I wanted to bring up is that, number one, it fails the test of a prophet. In chapters 3 through 7, it mentions a 5,500-year prophecy that's given, and it claims that after that time period, Adam will be brought back into the garden that was in Eden. And it fails that test. So
yes, it does. It does. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, we're not back in the garden. We're still dispersed across the land. The New Jerusalem is not here. The Messiah is not ruling and reigning on the earth. There's no peace. There's none of this stuff. So that is a big fail. Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because the actual scriptures we do have, actually, there is a congruent timeline. You can add up the dates and the times and the years from when Adam was supposedly created. That's why they have, these genealogical records that are given to us all throughout, both in Genesis and Chronicles, and also Matthew and Luke. You have all these genealogies that are built for us, and then there's a lot of other genealogy built into all the other books in between, that you can literally add up these times, and you realize that this 5,500-year time period has already come and gone, according to documented history, and this prophecy did not come true for Adam. So,
yes, absolutely. Before we move on to the second one, there, Sean, another thing was that I was asked, well, what about the Gospel of Nicodemus? Because we see that same prophecy iterated in that book about a 5,500-year, prophetic utterance, and I would say that's a bad book too. I mean, just because there's another book that talks about it being fulfilled, or it's just reiterated in that book, doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that there's copyists out there that know how to take bad information from bad books and put it in there to make it seem legitimate, to trick people. So yeah, I don't think that's legitimate either. So
yeah, and if the Gospel of Nicodemus, supposedly penned around the 2nd century, came up, according to the oldest manuscript we have, which was in Arabic of the first book of Adam and Eve, came in the 6th century. So that means the first book of Adam and Eve came 400 years later than the Gospel of Nicodemus. So yes, if it's already taking themes and names and concepts from biblical literature, and it grabbed bad information from other bad biblical literature that came about during the Gnostic period in the 2nd century, this is why you would steal that prophecy from it. So
exactly.
Yeah. So the second one that we brought to people's attention was that in chapters 1 and 2, the description given for the location of the Garden of Eden doesn't line up with what Jubilees and Genesis details.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I mean, it's I don't know if the next slide talks a little bit about it or not, but it basically has the location in a different setting, and it just it doesn't work.
It doesn't work at all. Number 3, in chapter 4, Adam claims to have flesh like an angel before he sinned. This is contradictory to not only Genesis and Jubilees, but also 1st Enoch, Luke, and 1 Corinthians. Men do not receive bodies like angels until after the promised resurrection. Men were made of dirt from the beginning, and Yeshua is the first man born of women and made from dirt to receive the promised eternal body at his resurrection.
Yes. Yes, that is what's promised in the scriptures. That's what Yeshua himself talks about. As you mentioned here, Paul in 1 Corinthians in great detail talks about the differences between bodies of a man, Adam, the way he was created from the moment of his creation until what's promised for us at the resurrection, which is an angelic body. We're not denying that's our promise, is to take on a different type of spiritual body one day. But we definitely didn't start in that type of bodily environment, and that leans heavily towards Gnosticism, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, is that you were already glorified, and then you fell to a base nature, and then you will be glorified again. So that's where Gnosticism actually varies in its initial approach to the theological afterlife, is its actual theological origins, which is a claim that you were a god, but then you descended and you can become a god again. So it's very different from what Scripture teaches. So the next one, number 4, is in chapter 9, the description of the river coming out of the Garden of Eden is contrary to what Genesis 2 describes. The river that watered the garden and did not originate in the garden from under the tree of life, but instead it originated in the land of the Eden outside the garden and parted into 4 rivers once it reached the garden. So it's very contrasting description of the land, interaction with the river, the garden, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and if you're not someone who pays close attention to the details, this could be something that you can get tricked with. I mean, it sounds good. It sounds similar to what is talked about throughout the scriptures about water coming from the New Jerusalem, and you know, it and all this other stuff sounds good, but it's just the details aren't lining up.
Yep. Number 5, in chapter 12, God tells Adam he made him of light, but this is contrary to Genesis 1 and 2, and Jubilees 3, and 1 Enoch 61, and Revelation 22. We were made of the dirt of the earth, and at the resurrection we are illumined and given angelic style bodies clothed in light. Yeah. So this is just more contrasting differences. And then also a 6th point of contradiction is that in chapter 16, it claims Adam never saw the sun until after being removed from the garden. But Genesis and Jubilees tells us that Adam and Eve were outside the garden for several weeks before entering after their creation. And this is a huge problem, Ken, because we know that the sun was created on day 4 and it gives light upon the earth.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, Sean, whether or not the author, I mean, being that this after John had his revelation about the whole concept of there not needing to be a sun or moon in the New Jerusalem because the light of the Father and Yeshua and all that will light it up, right? So I'm just wondering if they've got that information from there, and then because they knew that Adam was in paradise or in the garden, that's why he didn't see the sun. But that's not what the text actually says. That it's not like the sun isn't something that won't shine in the New Jerusalem. It's just that it's not needed to provide it light. That's all.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Number 7, in chapter 23 through 24, Adam offers his own blood on an altar to God, and God accepts the human blood offering. This is a large error in the commandments of God as outlined in Leviticus 15. Human blood or discharge makes a person unclean, and his sacrifice is not accepted according to the Torah. So this is a big deal.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time. Yahweh hated this stuff.
Yeah. So this is definitely a Gnostic origin.
Doing stuff, a practice.
That's right. Number 8, chapter 27 claims that Satan was thrown down from heaven before or during the time of Adam. This is contrary to 1 Enoch, Jubilees, and Job. Satan is still able to travel above the firmament to the heavens above as he chooses.
Yep. So I agree with that too. I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah, this is what we're told in Enoch, Jubilees, and Job. So, number 9, chapter 1 and chapter 28 claims there's a sea of water that can bring atonement to Adam and cause him to regain his bright nature of light and return to the garden. This is contrary to the process of atonement outlined through the covenant and accomplished by the Son of God, Yeshua, through his priesthood. And that's explained through the priestly process of promise to the believers in Exodus 19, to the priestly process that's outlined in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7, to the prophesied promise of our Messiah's priesthood in Psalm 110, just Jesus' own words in John 5, to Paul's explanation of Yeshua's priesthood in 1 Corinthians 15, to the writer of Hebrews' explanation of Yeshua's priesthood in chapters 1, 5, and 10, and also in Revelation 20 and 22 by John in his revelation.
Yes, exactly. It seems like the author of this book didn't even have a clue as to what Yeshua's true preordained role was to, really save mankind.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad theologically. And number 10, this is the last point of contradiction that we're going to cover in the first book of Adam and Eve, and then we're going to cover 2 more in the second book of Adam and Eve. So number 10 says, chapter 45, it prophesies that God will give Adam the water of life from the garden on the day that his blood is shed on Golgotha. I think we all know this terminology, and that's referring to Yeshua that was crucified on a hill outside of Jerusalem. This is another failed prophecy, as the first resurrection event, which happens at the last trumpet, is when Adam and all the righteous dead in Christ live again and eat of the tree of life and drink of the water of life in the garden, which is also the New Jerusalem. This is detailed in Matthew 24, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, and Revelation 22. This is a second failed prophecy in the first book of Adam and Eve.
Yeah, and they're huge. They're absolutely huge. They're not minor ones.
Yeah, these are fundamentally huge. All right, so in the second book of Adam and Eve, we have chapter 11 and 12 calls Seth's children the children of God and the watchers because of their abstinence and their life of purity and decision to not dwell near Cain's children. This is contrary to Genesis 6, Jubilees 5, Job 1 and 2, Daniel 4, and all of 1 Enoch, which calls the children the sons of God, the angels of heaven. And the rebellious watchers were from heaven as angels. So this is very contradictory theology, which because there's so much. That's right. And to me, it would make sense that they would include the Sethite theory in this book, because if it was written according to the time period it was written, and it has all this other Trinitarian language, this means that they basically were just taking information from Catholic apologists of that time, people like Augustine, who came up with the idea of the Sethite theory about 100 years earlier.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And just because Paul mentions us being sons of God, this is something that Sean and I have tried to communicate over the last couple of years, is this understanding of prolepsis, and that even though something's mentioned in a tense that is present, according to how the writer lays it out, doesn't mean that that's exactly what the person embodies. He just wants his audience to believe that these promises are so true and they're so coming that just consider yourself already a son of God. You're going to be just like the angels. That's the promise of the resurrection. So, yeah, it's just something that I think is really important for people to understand.
And you can almost get away with allowing this differentiation here, except there's no mention of the giants. There's no mention of the Nephilim idea of the mixing. And you also have it literally calling the children of Seth the watchers. And so this is a specific term that's given to angels in the book of Daniel and in the book of Enoch. So yeah, this is a big problem, big theological problem.
Yeah.
Number 12, chapter 12 in the second book of Adam and Eve describes the Garden of Eden to not have been planted in the land, but instead hovering above the land approximately 45 cubits, which equates to approximately 67 feet. So think about this, guys. This book claims that the children of Seth lived on this mountaintop near the Garden of Eden and didn't go down the mountain and live near the children of Cain, because they wanted to stay near this Garden of Eden, which was hovering above their heads 67 feet. This is contrary to Genesis 2, to Jubilees 3, and the entire covenant promise of Israel, which is to inherit the physical land of the New Jerusalem that will descend and sit on the ground between the Euphrates and the Nile, because the Garden of Eden was planted in the land of Eden, just like we see from Genesis, Jubilees, and even Second Esdras.
Yeah, keyword planted, right?
Yeah, planted. Yeah, it's literally, it was used for a reason. It's a garden that was planted with a walled off structure, and it wasn't just hovering above the ground. So this is why, at the same time, I didn't include this as a point of contrast, Ken, but this is why one of the other points that I considered was, it says that Adam was thrown out of heaven, was cast down from heaven. Because if this Garden of Eden is considered the kingdom of heaven and it's floating above the land, that's why I would say that Adam was cast down out of heaven. So little stuff like that. It just, by the way, there's some other points in this book that I didn't bring up, like 2 different times Adam makes a covenant with Satan himself, and then he gets in trouble and God forgives him and lets him get out of the covenant with Satan. And then there's another time where Satan goes to deceive Cain, because Adam and Eve were going to let Abel marry Cain's twin sister. And then Satan incited Cain to be mad about that. And so as a result, Cain goes and physically abuses Eve. And then Eve tells Adam about it, and Adam doesn't do anything about it. And just is sad that his son just beat his wife. So like, there's some really strange stuff in this book that I wouldn't agree with just on a whole bunch of different levels, but we try to provide the big theological issues that would completely negate this book as being scripture, in our opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And we want to lay this one to rest, right? I mean, I think the focus of this show is to help people look at books that really will enhance your faith in the Father and in the promise and the message of the gospel of the kingdom of God. We don't want to spend hours and hours and episodes after episodes going line by line through books that can be easily debunked, in our opinion, quickly. So yeah, we only have a certain amount of time, and we want to use it to the best of our ability and to enhance your life. So
yeah. So this one, like I said, I have on screen for the viewer to see: 2 failed prophecies over a dozen theological contradictions. And ultimately it is, in my opinion, it's a fictional dumpster fire. So
yes, unfortunately. And we're not trying to be passive aggressive, or we're not feel like the book is legit and they adhere to what the teachings are in it. Please, this is our review on it. This is to our understanding, it's clear. And I don't like to say it doesn't pass the feely test, because I know people are like, well, first, it doesn't feel right when you read it. It sounds wrong, and it doesn't feel like other scriptures. I don't like to say that, but to me, this one doesn't give me the feels,
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can condition your feels according to the Word of God, once you know actual sound doctrine. So, folks, I just want to encourage us. We're going to jump into the book of the Apocalypse of Baruch, and just wanted to give a quick reminder if anyone has not seen season 1 of Honor of Kings. We already did an episode on the first 9 chapters of Baruch. We're going to pick up back on chapter 10. But just as a quick recap of who is this Baruch character, his name shortly was Baruch ben Neriah. And in Hebrew, that's called Blessed Son, My Candle is Yah. He was a scribe, he was a disciple, and a friend of the prophet Jeremiah. And he lived between 630 and 567 BC. It's what they would consider the 6th century. This was during the days of Jeremiah. And a biblical scholar and professor of Jewish studies at the University of Georgia claims that Baruch ben Neriah, he edited and copied the books that we have in our Bible from Deuteronomy all the way to 2 Kings. So this gentleman has a large hand in the history of scriptures, and he has his own 2 books. They used to be in our Bibles, Ken, but they were taken out. So these are some of those hidden books that were in the American canon of 60, that used to be the American canon of 80, but then they got taken out about 140 years ago by 2 dudes that had no authority to take these books out.
Yeah, 2 spiritists. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad because, as we're going to see, and if you do go it's an amazing book. It lines beautifully. Yeah, let's do this, buddy.
Yeah, and for anyone that wants to catch up after you watch this episode, this was the title and the thumbnail on season 1 of Honor of Kings, Babylonian Raiders and Lost Ark. We covered the first 9 chapters of the Apocalypse of Baruch, and we're going to go over chapter 10 through 14 this week. And so, Ken, would you like to start reading?
Yeah, I think we did 2 episodes, did we not? I think we split them between 2
We may
episodes.
have. You're
Yeah,
right.
I think it was
We-
episode 15 where we covered chapters 1 through 4, I think, and then from 5 to 9 was episode 14. We kind of did a reversal there.
Reverse. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're linked up at the last and in the playlist as well, so they'll be able to find them if they search this title for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I'll start reading, buddy.
Okay.
Okay, chapter 10. And it came to pass after 7 days that the word of God came to me. Support the captivity of the people unto Babylon. But do you remain here amid the desolation of Zion? And I will show to you after these days what will befall at the end of days. And I said to Jeremiah, as the Lord commanded me. And he, indeed, departed with the people. But I, Baruch, returned and sat before the gates of the temple, and I lamented with the following lamentation over Zion, and said, Blessed is he who was not born, or he who, having been born, has died. But as for us who live, woe unto us, because we see the afflictions of Zion, and what has befallen Jerusalem. I will call the sirens from the sea, and you, Lilin, come you from the desert, and you, Shaddim and dragons, from the forests. Awake and gird up your loins unto morning, and take up with me the dirges, and make lamentation with me. You husbandmen, sow not again. And, O earth, wherefore give you your harvest fruits? Keep within you. And you, vine, why further do you give your wine? For an offering will not again be made from there in Zion, nor will first fruits again be offered. And do you, O heavens, withhold your dew, and open not the treasuries of rain? And do you, O sun, withhold the light of your rays? And do you, O moon, extinguish the multitude of your light? For why should light rise again where the light of Zion is darkened? And you bridegrooms, enter not in, and let not the brides adorn themselves with garlands. And you women, pray not that you may bear. For the barren shall above all rejoice, and those who have no sons shall be glad, and those who have sons shall have anguish. For why should they bear in pain, only to bury in grief? Or why again should mankind have sons? Or why should the seed of their kind again be named? Where this mother is desolate, and her sons are led into captivity. From this time forward, speak not of Moreover, you priests, take you the keys of the sanctuary, and cast them into the height of heaven, and give them to the Lord, and say, Guard your house yourself, for lo, we are found false stewards. And you virgins, who weave fine linen and silk with gold of Ophir, take with haste all these things, and cast them into the fire, that it may bear them to him who made them, and the flames send them to him who created them, lest the enemy get possession of them. Yeah, the overall tone of this chapter, I mean, and several chapters in this book, is very melancholic, isn't it?
Yeah, he's sad about the temple being destroyed, or it's actually being sieged right now by Babylon. And so he's sad that it's about to be destroyed, and the father is having to kind of reassure him. And so but yet Baruch is still sad through this.
Yeah, I mean, what he thinks is coming to a complete end, right? The Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian armies are surrounding Jerusalem. People are going off into captivity. He's just had to tell Jeremiah to go with the people, right, to support them. And interestingly enough, there's a book called the Epistle of Jeremiah, which records this moment where him and his contemporaries are heading over to Babylon, and he's basically just telling them, when we get there, serve Yahweh. Just because we're going in the land doesn't mean we can just start changing our ways. This is the reason why we're going there, is because we weren't keeping the covenant. So that's a fascinating book. We might touch that one. It's very short. Yeah.
Here in the first few verses that you read in chapter 10, it says, the word that came to Baruch, it says, go tell Jeremiah, go and support the captivity of the people unto Babylon. But you remain here amid the desolation of Zion, and I will show you after these days what will befall at the end of days. So it's like he's trying to encourage him by saying, like, I know that you're sad that this is happening. And this is kind of part of the ongoing discourse that we're going to see for the rest of this book, is that Baruch is questioning, why are you letting this happen, God? And then God's telling him, you're going to see this happen, but at the same time, I'm going to tell you the end of the story. So
Yes.
because this destruction of the temple that was going on in the days of Jeremiah and Baruch by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, that was not the end of the story. And this is where the people of that day were probably, they would know this, especially if they had the writings of and Deuteronomy and Enoch. But even still, they're having a moment of crisis because there's literally armies at the gates, and they're wanting to just, and the northern kingdom, they've already been scattered. So there's a lot of reason for Baruch to be fretting right now, because he's one of the faithful, yet all around him for generations have been so many unfaithful that the Father is finally about to scatter the southern kingdom from the land as well. So this is one of those moments where I think it's just interesting to me that he wants to encourage Baruch by saying, I know that there's bad things happening right now, but let me tell you the end of the story. I'll tell you what's going to befall at the end of days. And Ken, I don't know about you, but I think that we all could be encouraged by that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the point of scripture and it passing along through the generations, is that the Father wanted every generation and subsequent generation to have the same message of hope, that, you may find yourself in some turmoil and some tyranny and in, places where you're just despondent and there's no hope. But as you said, Sean, there's the end of the story, which is talked about all. I even see it in Jubilees where this actual moment is prophesied, right, about how they're going to go into the land and he's going to have to spew them out because they're not keeping the covenant. So he gives them the warnings many years in advance. And it's surprising to me that someone like Baruch, who was likely very studied and possibly understood prophecy somewhat, didn't see this coming, or was confused about the circumstances that he found himself in. Because as we see throughout the dialogue between him and the Father in this book, it's almost like, it reminds me of John chapter 3 with Jesus and Nicodemus, where Jesus is like, are you a teacher and you don't know these things? Like, come on now. It just seems like it doesn't matter what generation it is. It's just, you can be smart, you can be a leader, you could be all these things, but you could lack knowledge, apparently.
Yeah, look at our current generation, right? There's a lot of competent men out there with great hearts that have been serving the Lord for a long, long time, yet they're bound in their mind with so much denominational teachings that they have forgotten the end of the story, and they start promoting things like preterism, which is the opposite of the end of the story, So yeah, it's in every generation for sure. Yeah. And I think, when I was doing some research, Ken, on Baruch's life, it seems that the scholars are not quite in agreement on whether or not he was a priest, or only they affirm that he was like the nephew of one of King Zedekiah's aristocrats, is one of his government officials, and so they affirm that he was considered like in an aristocrat family, and he was a scribe. But then there's some other Jewish literature, specifically I think it's called the Haggadah, that's read during the Seder Passover, that they actually mention Baruch as a priest.
Okay. Do we ever see him making any sacrifices on altars or anything like that? I don't recall.
I don't either. Like and what's interesting is it's speculated through this Jewish literature is that he actually was somehow in the descendancy of Mary. Yeah, Jesus's mother. So, I mean, I couldn't find any definitive research to present it, but I thought we do have definitive research that he was a scribe. According to this book, he's a prophet, and he's definitely, a friend and contemporary of Jeremiah. And he comes from an aristocrat family, but I don't know if the reason he's such an important guy is because he was also a priest. The reason I say that, brother, is because I listened to a fascinating lecture this past week by a Jewish professor at the Hebrew University, at the Jerusalem, I think it was the Jerusalem University. And she was basically talking about how much the Pharisees have actually scrubbed from Jewish literature the priesthood. And considering all the conversations and shows that you and I have done about the priesthood from Genesis to Revelation, how interesting that is, because here's a Hebrew-speaking professor in Israel that grew up in Israel that is challenging the status quo of the modern day Rabbinic Judaism by claiming that over time they have literally scrubbed from the writings any indication of the importance of the priesthood, to the point where it is this why they don't want the Judaism doesn't want to recognize the prophet Baruch, and they definitely don't want to recognize the Messiah because he was prophesied to be our high priest.
Yeah.
So to understand the priesthood and all of its supplementary literature would help you understand how, Yeshua fulfilled prophecy so well.
Yeah, Sean, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me, especially since we've done some pretty in-depth research regarding the between the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts, and even just looking into some of the early, quote unquote church fathers, like Justin Martyr, for instance, having conversations with some of these, second century Pharisees, basically saying, you guys have scrubbed a lot of stuff out of these books that would remove the Son of Man, the Son of Yeshua. And so those are some pretty wild assertions. And when you kind of dig a little deeper, you start to side with people like Justin Martyr, and you start to see, yeah, it's true. When you look at the Septuagint, compare it to the Masoretic text, yeah, they did remove a lot of stuff. And that's actually something we might introduce into this Honor of Kings show, is the differences between those two, Masoretic text, Septuagint, eventually. So keep an eye out for that, possibly, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, because it seems like there are different translations out there, and our modern Protestant canon of 66 that we have, it basically goes solely off of the Hebrew Masoretic text that was derived around the 9th century AD. So I guess what we've theorized is it might be an interesting show to actually look at the translation of the Greek in comparison with some of these texts, because many of these texts that we're reviewing was actually found in Greek, and then some of them in Latin, depends on when they were translated, but most of them were found in Greek and also some in Ethiopic. So none of them were found in 9th century Hebrew, and none of them were found in English.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, John, even the second Baruch book that we're doing right now, some of them have been found in the Greek manuscripts, but a lot of scholars say that based off of how it was written, it shows evidence that it was actually transliterated from Hebrew.
That's
right. Which is interesting. And just so the viewer understands, this book has been in the Syriac Orthodox canon for a very, very, very long, which is part of the Orthodox tradition. So, they've had that for a very long time. So Sean and I, when we do these books, when we choose books, we want to see which ones have actually been in canons, because there's lists that you can find where there are several of them that haven't even been in one canon. So the likelihood of that being legitimate, it lessens itself in potential. So, I just want to throw that in there.
And we're back. By the way, Ken, I forgot to make sure all the viewers know that they should be subscribing to the channel they're watching.
Yeah, that would be nice if you guys wouldn't mind. It takes probably 3 seconds to just hit that red square and a rectangle rather. And if you can do that, helps out. But also if you hit the like button on this video, that helps us out too. If you're watching and you feel like you're benefiting from the conversations that we're having and the material that we're putting up for you guys, that'd be awesome. Or if you hate it, hit the thumbs down. Hey, that's fine. This is a free countries we live in right now currently. Drop some comments in the comment section below if you disagree, or if you think we didn't do any justice regarding some text or whatever. Let us know.
Absolutely, brother. So as we were looking at chapter 10, was there anything else in this chapter that stuck out to you that you wanted to comment on?
I just, I mean, other than the fact that I understand, I feel for the guy. You know, Baruch is seeing everything kind of fall into pieces here. But I mean, there's some theology that he layers in this lamentation of his that, you know, I find pretty interesting, and it definitely coincides with what's taught in. One of the things that I found funny was about telling the priest, I think was it the priest, where he says, throw the keys of the sanctuary back to the highest heavens and let him watch his house. It was just like,
Yeah,
that's bold. That's pretty bold, in my opinion, to say that to the Father. I mean, he's, you know.
yeah, that's right. And that's what makes me wonder if he was a priest or not, because it's almost like he's talking to a separate group, and he's not a part of that group, by saying to the priests, you know, take your keys of the sanctuary and cast them into the height of heaven and give them to the Lord. And because they had failed the priesthood of that day, they were corrupt. And this is where, if anyone wants to know what kind of corrupt that they had done, it was basically they were worshiping other gods in the temple. We see this in Ezekiel chapter 8 and 9. So this is they had been extremely corrupt in the temple during that day, and they were breaking the covenant. And so basically, it seems like the priesthood is like the last line of defense for the covenant, and the people themselves will break it. But that's where the priesthood was supposed to be there to make atonement for them. But if the priesthood is breaking the covenant, yes, who's to make atonement for them? Right? They need to be. Yeah, they need to be repentant.
Exactly. That's insult to injury, right? It's yeah. That's why, and it's true that priesthood is so very important, and it's an overlooked and underappreciated office that I think that we definitely we'll see that in the future being upheld and you know, if I say glorified, it's an important office, and it was during these days as well. And this was one of the reasons why the people had to be spewed out of the land, is because even the priests were corrupting everything, and they weren't following the law of God and teaching, you know, and teaching the people sound doctrine, and they were, you know, they should have been doing, as you said, last line of defense. So it's just sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. You want me to go to chapter 11?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay, here in chapter 11, verse 1 through 5, it says, "Moreover, I, Baruch, say this against you, Babylon. If you had prospered, and Zion had dwelt in her glory, yet the grief to us has been great that you should be equal to Zion. But now, lo, the grief is infinite, and the lamentation measureless. For lo, you are prospered, and Zion is desolate. Who will be judged regarding these things? Or to whom shall we complain regarding that which has befallen us? O Lord, how have you borne it? Our fathers went to rest without grief, and lo, the righteous sleep in the earth in tranquility, for they knew not this anguish, nor yet had they heard of that which had befallen us. Would that you had ears, O earth, and would that you had a heart, O dust, that you might go and announce in Sheol and say to the dead, blessed are you more than we who live." All right, that's all for that chapter.
Yeah, and that's not a figure of speech, in my opinion. I mean, it's embellished a little bit, right, to add to a little bit of the drama here. But if you guys watched the video that I released about 2 weeks ago about Sheol, Hades, the world of the, you know, the underworld of the dead, it's true. It's all of, like I said, Baruch is layering theological nuggets throughout his lamentations that line up with the scriptures regarding the cosmology that the Father created. And so it is possible for people to be in Sheol and using this adage of oh earth, you know, if you had ears, if you could just tell these people, you know, what's going on here in the land of the living and how better off they are down there, right?
Yeah. And so we do have accurate theology being announced here, because he's talking about people who die, who sleep in the earth, and they are in Sheol. And this is, as you know, you talked about, this is accurate theology. You've done an entire video on it. We've done other shows on it. We reviewed this concept. I think it was in episode 7 of season 1 when we went over the book of First Enoch. And so, yeah, this is definitely, he's repeating, even in his lamentation and his sorrowful expressions, he's repeating accurate theology here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Do you want to go to 12?
Yeah, let's move on. I don't mind that. Okay, but I will say this as I think, and I will speak against you, O land, which are prospering. The noonday does not always burn, nor do the rays of the sun constantly give light. Do not expect. Is there a glitch there? One. Do not expect land hope. I don't know if that's right there, brother. Oh, it is. It's in the. Okay, that doesn't make sense to me. Let me see. Do not expect.
I think it's saying to
rejoicing and be great, uplift, and boastful. For surely. Yeah. Okay. For surely in its own season shall the divine wrath awake against you, which now in long suffering is held in as it were by rains. And when I had said these things, I fasted 7 days. Sorry, guys. I was trying to read that, what was on the screen there, and it's just kind of.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing from the text that we copied over.
Yeah. It's like a president, right? Reading off a teleprompter just verbatim and just looking kind of foolish.
This is a really short chapter, but he's just more lamentation, basically. He's talking about the land that is prospering, which is Babylon, versus Zion, like he said in the previous chapter, which is now in desolate because it's being destroyed, invaded.
Right.
Yeah. And then so he's going to start fasting. And he says, and when I said these things, I fasted 7 days. So this is something unique that we see in the fasting concept, because we see him do this quite often in this book, right?
Yeah. 7 days of fasting seems to be the standard for which he does his fasting throughout this book. And I haven't seen this anywhere else with a specific number. And the Father actually tells him to fast 7 days, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's very interesting. If there's nothing else about this specific chapter, I'll jump to 13.
Yeah, we can move along.
Okay. So here in chapter 13, he says, and it came to pass after these things that I, Baruch, was standing on Mount Zion, and lo, a voice came from the height and said unto me, stand up on your feet, Baruch, hear the word of the mighty God, because you've been astonished at what has befallen Zion. You shall therefore be assuredly preserved to the consummation of the times, that you may be for a testimony, so that if ever those prosperous cities say, what has the mighty God brought upon this retribution? Why has the mighty God brought upon us this retribution? You can say to them, you and those like you shall have seen this evil. This is the evil and retribution which has come upon you and upon your people in its destined time, that the nations may be thoroughly smitten. And then they shall be in anguish. And if they say at that time, for how long? You will say, you who have drunk the strained wine, drink you also of its dregs, the judgment of the lofty one, who has no respect of persons. On this account, he had aforetime no mercy on his own sons, but afflicted them as his enemies, because they sinned. Then therefore were they chastened that they might be sanctified. But now, you peoples and nations, you are guilty, because you have always trodden down the earth and used the creation unrighteously. For I have always benefited you, and you have always been ungrateful for the beneficence. All right, so that's all of 13.
Yeah, that reminds me just of what Paul says in Romans 11. How the household of God receives judgment first. And he starts with his sons here, right? It's like, if the Father's going to be, putting retribution upon you and upon your people because of your sins, and you are sons, I mean, all the more he's going to be doing to those who are foreign to the covenant and who, haven't adhered to the covenant as well. So
yeah,
it's just, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're someone who's a descendant of Abraham or not. If you're not keeping the covenant, it doesn't. You're all one in the same person with regards to how he will treat you in the end.
That's exactly. What do you think? I mean, I think I know what you think, but I just want to get your thoughts on the very first few verses here in chapter 13, because it mentions some unique stuff. And this is where I've heard other people think that this passage is telling Baruch that he's going to be one of the two witnesses.
Yeah. Okay.
So he says, because you've been astonished at what befell in Zion, you shall therefore surely be preserved to the consummation of the times, that you may be for a testimony, so that if there ever those prosperous cities say, why has God brought this upon us, retribution, you can say to them, you and those like you who shall seen this evil and retribution which has come upon you and your people in its destined time, that the nations may be thoroughly smitten. So this is all one big proposition and response. Piece of context here. But first part of it, do you think that this is saying he's going to be preserved to be one of the two witnesses?
Well, in all honesty, when I first picked this book up and read it and came across this text, I had to stop. I had to stop and scratch the head because it sounds as though, I mean, the whole preservation verbiage here makes it sound like, oh, the Father's going to be using him again for some, distant time period where he used for his money or whatever. And so I thought it could possibly be referring to one of the witnesses, because that's the age-old question is, who are the witnesses, right? Is it Elijah? Is it Enoch? Who could it be? Is it John? Well, could it be Baruch? No, I don't actually think it is. And after further study and just seeing kind of the wording in this book tends to use this preservation concept consistently with regards to those who are in Sheol waiting for what's referred to as the consummation of the times, that being the resurrection of the dead on the day of the Lord. So he like everybody else that's righteous would be going to Sheol, the righteous side of Sheol, to be preserved until the consummation of the times, which is a synonym for the day of the Lord.
Yeah, that's the way I would view it too as well, understanding the resurrection and what that terminology means, consummation of the times. And then what's interesting, though, is he mentions the nations in verse 5 and like part of the response, because, the testimony is, I guess, when it says that you may be for a testimony, and that could be part of the response, it seems like, is that you get to tell these other nations, or these other people that, well, it's because the nations may be thoroughly smitten. So I guess if we add this conversation to the rest of this chapter, I guess my question comes along as, it seems as though that the judgment that's being put down on Jerusalem, that's being, God ordained this judgment to happen to Jerusalem because they're breaking the covenant. And he's using Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army of the Chaldeans to enact this judgment. And we're told this in Jeremiah, and actually Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as like the hammer of the Lord in Jeremiah, because he's being used to do this. And it seems like it's done so that it also can bring about judgment on the other nations as well that are around Jerusalem.
Faceted, endeavor that the Father had obviously known about before it even happened, and had set it forth to happen as it was, and it definitely had those repercussions and those ripple effects, I guess, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Last question on this chapter here. You remember how in chapter 10 you read about the Shadim and the Lilin? Yeah. Right? Do you think that this is the reference? Because he's talking about the punishment that's going to happen to the other nations as well. And it says here in I think verse 11 and 12, but now you peoples and nations, you are guilty because you've trodden down the earth and used the creation unrighteously. For I've always benefited you, and you've always been ungrateful for the beneficence. So I'm wondering if these hybrid creatures that are mentioned earlier, not just, well, the Shadim, from my research and my understanding, the Shadim is also referenced to, I think, chapter 27 of this book, and it's called the Shades. It's like the specters, the ghosts. It's like the Nephilim, basically.
Yeah, the unclean spirits.
It's
just another synonym for that.
For the viewer to understand, it's kind of like the unclean spirits. But then the Lilin, what's your take on what the Lilin are, Ken?
The Lilin, well, first of all, when I looked into that word, I think what I saw pulled up on my computer screen was that Isaiah mentions it once, I think in Isaiah 34:14. I don't know, man. I think it's a hybrid entity as well. That one has me stumped. If I'm going to be honest, that one kind of has me stumped. But the sirens one is a little more interesting, because in Micah chapter 1 verse 8, when we go to the Septuagint version, it says, "Therefore shall she lament."
Do you have that? I'm sorry, Ken. You broke up a little bit.
And mourning as of the daughters of sirens. So Micah obviously had an idea of what sirens were. If we're thinking that the Septuagint version is a legitimate source of truth, and I really do. The sirens seem to be a hybridized version of animal, human entities, and Yes, it's because men in their corrupt state and in their wanting to be better than God and to create whatever they want to create and wreak havoc on the earth, they're creating these things, and this is the result of their sin.
Ken, we have someone in the audience is asking, is the Shadim talking about shadow people?
I'm not qualified enough to give a proper response on that. I've heard people talking about shadow people and what they could potentially be. I don't know. I just don't.
Yeah, I've never had any kind of encounter with what people claim are shadow people, so I feel also unqualified to really say. I just know that from the actual definition that I can research, about this word shadim that's used in this book, it seems to be talking about ghosts and specters or unclean spirits, basically. So,
right.
Yeah. All right. So let's. I just think it's interesting because that definitely would be using the creation unrighteously, like you said, to create hybrid entities.
Yeah. And they're doing that today. They're still doing it, and it's going to continue to increase. Right. This unrighteousness, this misuse of what the Father gave us to do here on the earth, it's just going to exponentially increase until the point where Yeshua has to come.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anything else in this chapter, or do you want to jump to 14?
We can probably move on to the next chapter here.
Okay, I apologize, man. You cut out a little bit. I couldn't hear your response.
Oh, I was just going to say, for the sake of time, we could probably just end with chapter 14 now. Yeah.
Who read last? Was it you or me?
Oh, I think it was you. I can read this.
Okay.
And I answered and said, Lo, you have shown me the method of the times, and that which shall be after these things. And you have said unto me that the retribution, which has been spoken of by you, shall come upon the nations. And now I know that those who have sinned are many, and they have lived in prosperity, and departed from the world, but the few nations will be left in those times. To whom those words shall he say which you did? Sorry. To whom those words shall he say? Okay, I don't know what that's saying. Sorry, but he said what you did say. I apologize, guys. I don't know if that's another glitch or if I'm just my reading comprehension isn't good today. For what advantage is there in this? Or what evil, worse than what we have seen befall us, are we to expect to see? But again, I will speak in your presence. What have they profited who had knowledge before you, and have not walked in vanity as the rest of the nations, and have not said to the dead, Give us life, but always feared you, and have not left your ways? And lo, they have been carried off, nor on their account have you had mercy on Zion. And if others did evil, it was due to Zion that on account of the works of those who wrought good works, she should be forgiven, and should not be overwhelmed on account of the works of those who wrought unrighteousness. But who, O Lord, my Lord, will comprehend your judgment? Or who will search out the profoundness of your way? Or who will think out the weight of your path? Or who will be able to think out your incomprehensible counsel? Or who of those that are born has ever found the beginning or end of your wisdom? For we have all been made like a breath. Breath stands involuntarily and again dies. So it is with the nature of men, who depart not according to their own will, and know not what will befall them in the end. For the righteous justly hope for the end, and without fear depart from this habitation, because they have with you a store of works preserved in treasuries. On this account also these without fear leave this world, and trusting with joy, they hope to receive the world which you have promised them. But as for us, woe to us, who also are now shamefully entreated, and at that time look forward only to evils. But you know accurately what you have done by means of your servants, for we are not able to understand that which is good as you are, our Creator. But again, I will speak in your presence, O Lord, my Lord. When of old there was no world with its inhabitants, you did devise and speak with a word, and forthwith the works of creation stood before you. And you did say that you would make for your world man as the administrator, that he by no means made on account of the world, but the world on account of him. And now I see that as for the world which was made on account of us, lo, it abides, but we, on account of whom it was made, depart.
Okay.
Yeah, that's sorry, I apologize about some of the wording there. I got tripped up a couple times, but yeah, it's the world was made for us, just like the Sabbath, right, Sean? Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Same with this world. And just because the world continues on, even though it's moaning and groaning and it longs for the revealing of the sons of God, aka the resurrection of our souls from out of Sheol, we are promised the hope, right? This is, the couple sentences there that talks about how those who have hope and joy and understand what happens in the end, they will die knowing, they will leave this habitation knowing that the gospel message of the King God here is for them, and it's a great message.
Yeah, and it, I think that in his mixture of trying to get his, he's trying to gather himself basically, right? He's trying to get his brain together because he's got all this lamentation and sorrow and fear and fret, but yet he's actually speaking with an angel right now to get an encouraging message from the Father and to get prophecy about the end of days. And I just think it's interesting. The question he asks here in verse 8, but he says, "But who, O Lord, my Lord, will comprehend your judgment, or will search out the profoundness of your way? Or who will think out the weight of your path?" He's talking about who's going to learn the law and the commandments. He actually says this later in further chapters. Mm-hmm. But he's like, if you destroy this place and you scatter us, who's going to teach your righteous law to everyone else? And he's worried about this, Yeah. And I think this is this is a true heart for the Father's behavior, for the Father's Torah. Is this guy Baruch?
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. He kind of opens up his chest a little bit and reveals, the nature of what he believes is truly important, and that is to keep the covenant, even though many of his brethren were just not. And this was the reason why they had to, reap the rewards of what they were sowing. But his heart was towards the law, and for the world essentially to know what the law was, right? Because they were supposed to be a beacon of hope and the ones to shine the light of the Torah to the nations, so that, as the Father talks about in Deuteronomy, you're supposed to track the nations. Like, what kind of God is this? Like, how are they so blessed? How come they're doing so well and they're so prosperous and they're in their righteous deeds and stuff? And they have a God that just is backing them with this, right? That was the purpose, and they just weren't doing that.
In fact, we actually see that come to a strange moment of fulfillment in Esther chapter 8 in the Septuagint, where it has in verse 13, it actually talks about how the command that was decreed by Artaxerxes that the Jews could defend themselves and they could also practice their laws and their customs in all the different provinces they were scattered. As a result of this, the Gentile nations they were living around started getting circumcised and becoming Jews with them and believing and adopting their customs. And that's only told to us, though, in the Septuagint in Esther chapter 8, which I think is interesting because it's like the Father was like, all right, well, look, you guys can't keep it together in this land that I brought you to. So according to the covenant, I'm going to scatter you. But because there was this faithful remnant within you, they're going to get scattered too. That's just going to be me dropping like leaven in a lump of dough, right? Take the leaven of the faithful people that are keeping the commandments of God righteously, which are attractive because they're letting their light shine so that men may see their good works. And he's going to scatter them into the other nations, so then they can teach other people the ways of God as well. And this seems to be the idea that Baruch doesn't quite get at this point. He's having to be explained it to him through the rest of the book. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's hard to, you got to cut the guy slack, right? I mean, for everything that he's had to endure, I'm sure that, prophecy and his knowledge is going to be a little bit hindered because of his fears of what's really going on and what's taking place. But and we have to also keep I mean, there's a lot of context within this era that Baruch is living in. But if we also remember, this is just just one generation after Josiah, maybe 20 years after Josiah. And remember what happened in the days of Josiah. They had lost the book of the law. That's right. They weren't even following it. And then Josiah and his boys, they pick it up, find it, and start realizing they're not doing it. And so this is the same generation, if I'm not mistaken, that Baruch would be growing up in the midst of people that had realized, okay, wait, because remember, before Josiah was Manasseh. So there's a lot of problems
Terrible,
there.
terrible king.
Yeah, terrible king that was persecuting people that were trying to do the law. So this guy's coming up in a generation that, excuse me, Baruch is coming up in a generation that is coming back to the law, but unfortunately, they did not return wholeheartedly, like Jeremiah 3, verse 8 through 12. It talks about they returned with deception and treacherously, as Yahweh explains to Jeremiah. There was a faithful remnant. Don't get me wrong, but Josiah tried. But even, by the time he's deposed, and when you get to Zedekiah, they're doing lawlessness again, and this is where the faithful people like Jeremiah and Baruch are having to be the leaders that are trying to encourage the other people. Hey, go into Babylon. You're going to live there. If you guys have ever studied the book of Jeremiah, he explains to them, you will be there for 70 years, but I'm going to bring some of you guys back. So like he's trying to tell them it's not over. The story's not over. Israel's not over. We got a plan. This is part of it. This was prophesied. But I think, like you said, Ken, this generation are having to be reminded of these prophecies through Baruch and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, because they're literally growing up in what we would consider a spiritually adolescent generation, right? It's not like you had generation upon generation that was following the law of God faithfully and the priests were passing down the Torah faithfully. They did not. They came from Manasseh, and now they're in the days of, they had a short moment of light with Josiah, but now they're with Zedekiah. So they don't have a good track record in their last 100 years of people teaching them the law of God and prophecy.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
It just makes me wonder about our days, whether or not we could recognize prophecy being displayed and unfolded in front of our eyes the way that it was for Baruch, right? Because it's in retrospect, but when you're actually a specific prophecy in a time period that was already mentioned long ago, how well could you recognize that? And if you have godly men who claim to be prophets trying to get people back on track, it would just be hard in a time like today, you know what I mean? To believe them, to believe that they're legitimately sent by the Father the way that he used to use prophets, or the office of prophets back in those days. So I just wonder about our own day,
Yeah, like when the two witnesses show up, if they didn't have such specific circumstances for them to show up, being in Jerusalem, people trying to kill them, they can't be killed for 42 months. Like if there wasn't all those specific parameters, then being able to put plagues on any nation that tries to kill them, what I mean? Would we recognize a genuine prophet today?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why when the Father does bring back an actual prophet, it has to be someone so extreme like the two witnesses.
Yeah.
That's interesting, man. Any concluding thoughts here on these chapters?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. No, I mean, this book is amazing. I love this book so much. And the more that I read it, the more that I study, to me, it just feels very, very contemporaneous theologically with like books like Isaiah, Ezekiel, like the prophets, right? The ones that that have the same flair to it. So this is definitely a good book in my opinion so far. And I don't know do you want to maybe field some questions or?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure, brother.
If you guys have any questions, you can leave them in caps for us, and we'll try to get to them.
We just want to thank you to Miss Maria. She dropped some super stickers for us. We really appreciate that, sister.
Nice. I think is that my first?
I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry, brother. Ken, I apologize, brother. You cut out just then. I couldn't hear what you were saying. I don't know if the audience heard you either.
Did I? Okay. Yeah, I was just saying. I think that might have been my first super sticker. That's nice. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah. So, guys, if you have any questions about some of the content that we just ran over, or if you have any questions about some of the related content we mentioned during reviewing these chapters, please drop them in all caps in the chat, and that way we can answer them for you. So we just, as always, we try to interact a little bit with the audience if possible.
Yeah, and I think the plan is to stay in this book for a little bit more. I mean, I think, what is there, 80 chapters, Sean? High 70s? There's a lot of chapters, there's a lot of meat to cover in this book, and I don't know if we're going to do the whole thing. Yeah. Because we didn't with Enoch, and Enoch is one of my favorites. So
yeah. We're going to get back to Enoch, though. We're going to finish Enoch. We just...
tricky.
All right, Ken. Looks like the Blood Saves is asking, when are we doing the Vision of Paul?
Well, that has been added to the list, brother. I know that you've
Yes.
requested that in previous episodes.
Yeah.
It's a long list, and like I said earlier at the beginning of this episode, we really want to focus on books that we feel are going to enhance your understanding of the gospel message of the kingdom of God and just the overall message, right? And so,
If we
spending unnecessary time on books that we feel just won't enhance is something that we're going to try to probably stray away from, but we will consider it, and we do want to get back to some other books that people do believe are true that we think are tricky as well. So
yeah, that it's not just because the Vision of Paul is not widely known, but it just has
been
yeah, guys, we apologize for any glitches we're having today. We're doing our best. It's just technology. Just if you have a question that you may have asked and it got skipped or anything, just put it in all caps and put it back in the chat so that we can see it again. But yeah, I think we're going to be reviewing other books that are kind of suspect, Ken, and I think one of them was the Testament of Solomon, right?
Yes, the Testament of Solomon. That's on the list. It's relatively short. We could cover that probably in one episode. The Gospel of Nicodemus seems to keep coming up, so we might need to, do a point by point, kind of brief answer to that, whether or not it's legitimate, and just pick out the ones that we think are. I think the majority of last week's episode, and I could be wrong, they would rather we focus more on books like this that are have been in the canon, certain canons around the world, and that will definitely enhance their understanding of the message of the gospel of the kingdom of God. So I think that's the plan. But yes, definitely we'll focus on other books too. I just don't know if we're going to go line by line necessarily. It depends on the type of book and how long it is also. So.
Ken, we have a question from EFTUP World 2 is asking, does the Apocalypse of Baruch include Second Baruch?
It is the Second Baruch. So they're synonymous, and sometimes it's called Second Baruch or just Apocalypse of Baruch.
Yeah.
But they're the same, one and the same.
Yeah, and it depends on which scholar you're looking at. So there's Baruch, which is also referred to as First Baruch generically, but then some people call the Syriac version of Baruch, of the Apocalypse of Baruch, they call that Second Baruch. But then the Greek versions they'll call Second Baruch as well, or sometimes Third Baruch. So it really just depends on who you're getting your information from. But in a generic fashion, typically the Apocalypse of Baruch is also referenced as Second Baruch.
Yeah. I'm just looking in the comments there. Noel Brown is saying earlier you guys mentioned about the 7-day fast. Ezra did it as well. Okay, yeah, that might be right. Yeah, actually, I think I do remember Ezra doing that as well. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Noel.
Yep. All right, I think I saw another question. I just didn't put it in caps. Christopher Gomez is asking, are y'all going to do the Apocalypse of Elijah, the Ascension of Isaiah, or the Testament of Moses?
I think Ascension of Isaiah, Sean. That's, in my opinion, if I had to choose, and if we didn't, maybe we should just throw a list of. Like, you guys just put your input in and we'll do a graph chart and see what everyone comes up the top. But Ascension of Isaiah, that one's tricky. I'm not sure about that one. So that one might be good to put on screen and have us go through, Sean, just like this, because
test it out.
I'm still not sure about it. I'm not sure about it yet. So
yeah. Now this is a great question that comes up, Ken, whenever we talk about the theology of a book and how it lines up to what we're testing it by, as we explained at the beginning of this episode. But this question also comes up as well. This is by Dally Jacobson. He's asking, how old are these books? This is where it gets into the grounds of what's the oldest manuscript that historians have found for these books. That doesn't mean the actual book itself or the information inside the book is that old. It only means the manuscript that was found in whatever century is the oldest copy that they've ever found. So this is where the actual books themselves come into play. The claim of the book has to be considered, specifically if it's a claim saying they're getting a word by God through an angel or something from, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's this kind of concept of a prophet making a claim that he's getting a word from the Creator to give to mankind for hope and encouragement. Just like we have books, for example, Dali, we have books like Genesis that people claim the oldest living manuscript is from the 2nd century BC, about 200 years before Christ. But no one knows the official author of that book. It's traditionally, since the 12th century Judaism from Rambam, they attributed the book of Genesis to Moses, but that historically was, they didn't attribute it to Moses before the 12th century AD. So the earliest copy, the earliest manuscript that they've found for digging it up or has been preserved through the Vatican or somebody is the 2nd century BC, which is about 2,200 years ago. And that's just of the book of Genesis, but they technically don't know who actually wrote it. But we believe the things in Genesis because it lines up with continuity with the rest of the scriptures and also the timelines and also all the different qualifiers of why scholars view that book as valid and legitimate.
Yeah.
Same thing with, like you may have seen our episodes we did with the Book of Jubilees. The oldest copy is, I think, the 3rd century BCE, yet archaeologists have found artifacts that date back to the 7th century, which is also the days of Baruch and Jeremiah and Isaiah, that give credence to the Book of Jubilees being known and read and the calendar being followed during that time as well. So with the Book of Baruch, or the Apocalypse of Baruch, the claim of this book is that it is happening and it's recording the events through a firsthand recording, the narration of Baruch himself during the 6th century BCE, when the Babylonians are invading the temple in Jerusalem during the days of King Zedekiah. And as a result of that, that is information that Ken and I, put into our consideration when we're testing a book. So the oldest manuscript that I'm aware of in this particular book, I think it was around the 3rd century in the Greek. And I think the Syriac is, well, I don't know if it was the 1st century with the Syriac. Ken, do you have any ideas on the Syriac?
For Baruch, you're talking about specifically?
Yeah, the Apocalypse of Baruch.
Yeah. I think it was. Well, see, this is the thing. So this question comes up a lot, and it's like, what are the scholars? What's the general consensus regarding what the scholars have to say? And one of the things that I found was that the reason why they date it post 70 AD is because of the content in chapter 32, which we'll go through. And I know Sean has might have up, but Yahweh's telling Baruch that, this. Oh, am I cutting out again?
Yeah, brother. Can you repeat that last sentence or two? I think you're hitting a kind of an important statement there.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys. I apologize. I don't know what's going on here. I'm gonna have to look into this internet of mine here. But basically, scholars say that they believe that this second Baruch had to have been written post 70 AD because of some of the content that's in chapter 32 of this book, where it talks about how this building is going to be destroyed, but then again, you guys will rebuild it, and then that structure will have to be demolished, but then it will be renewed in perfection or something like that. I'm not quoting verbatim there, but they think, well, obviously this guy is seeing in the Second Temple period of the temple going down again and then being invaded by the Romans, and so in 70 AD, that whole thing, and so this was prophesied chapter 32. It must have been, the author must have been referring to that, when the scholars don't seem to think that, or at least in my opinion, the scholars aren't understanding that the New Jerusalem is the thing that needs to be perfected, that comes down, that's prophesied. They're not, what I'm getting at is they don't necessarily understand everything that's communicated in the scriptures. They might be smart in a lot of ways, and they definitely are, but putting all of your stock in scholarly opinions and teachings doesn't mean that they're right regarding the dates of some of these things. So that's just what I have to say about that with even Baruch. I mean, it's relevant. We're reading this book right now. So
yeah. So for a lot, and this is why we mentioned at the beginning of the show that this particular book was actually used to be in all of our Bibles, but these two guys, like Ken said, these two spiritists, that one of them was an Anglican priest. One of them went on after he edited the Bible. One of these guys went on to create his own cult. So these two guys named Westcott and Hort in the late 1800s, or two gentlemen responsible for new versions of the Bible being printed from what they claimed were more accurate Greek translations, and therefore these new Bibles did not include the Apocalypse of Baruch, which used to be in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know which one it was, Westcott or Hort, but one of them was known to consult spirits through mediums.
Yeah,
that's a no-no. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not putting my trust into blokes like that.
Yeah, it's however, whomever in that day said, "Oh, let's take 14 books out of the Bible and I'm cool with that. Everyone else should be okay with that too." And then they started printing all these new Bibles that only had 66 books instead of 80. I don't know how that gets by people. I don't know how the preachers of that day let that happen. I don't know how that worked, but I definitely would have raised my hand and asked questions. Yeah. So, so like that's the history that we're dealing with, though, is that this book that we're reading used to be in your Bibles. So we wouldn't probably even have to do this show for this book if that change had not occurred in the late 1800s. But as it is, so many people, in my opinion, and Ken, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but in my opinion, so many people need to know the information that's in this book to help them understand the covenant and the resurrection and the revelation and some of Yeshua's words. This is an amazing book that if it would clear up so many theological potholes if we still had it in our Bibles.
Yeah. There's no correction needed, but I would say the information is in the canon of 66, right? But there's no ambiguity with these books. There's just none. You would just understand it way better and earlier on in your life. So yeah. It can be a real blessing if you really dig into it. So I didn't see any other question. Okay. Joy is asking a quick question. Can you guys give a best choice of first century church historians to read? I would say no. Sorry,
it's okay.
I didn't hear it. Things are glitching up so bad right now. I don't know.
I'm sorry, brother. I'll just repeat it real quick. Joy's asking, can you guys give a best choice of first century church historians to read? I personally would say we already have them. The first century church historians, that's going to be your New Testament.
Yeah.
We already have them. And when it goes into the second century, maybe Irenaeus, maybe. But even then, I would just stick with reading your Old Testament and getting to know that intimately so that you can better understand the things being mentioned by the first century church historians, which are the New Testament books. Yeah. So that's the order of study that I would strongly encourage every believer.
Yeah. Polycarp's writings, unfortunately, we don't have. We disciple of John. There's some other guys that I think have been purposefully scrubbed away from history as well. But no, I agree with Sean. Just stick to your New Testament, and you'll do well.
All right. I don't see any other questions immediately, brother. Is there any concluding remarks for this episode?
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us again. I apologize once again for the technical glitches. It's kind of frustrating. I don't know if you guys can tell that I'm a perfectionist. I don't know if you've seen any of my other videos, but it takes me forever to release them because they have to be perfect. So when there's glitching in the computer and like delays in the sound and like all this other stuff, I get frustrated. I try not to display it. I guess that's a flaw that I need to work on. But I apologize if I look frustrated. But Sean's a cool member over there, and he's doing crazy crap behind the scenes. Plus, he has to deal with my northern internet connection that is patchy. So I'm gonna try to find something to deal with this because it's kind of driving me nuts, to be honest with you. But I'm so thankful for you guys for joining us, and hopefully it wasn't as noticeable as it seems to me on my end. But yeah.
Ken, we got one last question for you, brother. How's the new album coming along?
Thanks for your inquiry, Bill. It's going along pretty good. I'm waiting on a brother who's helping me out with some drum tracks. We're doing things a little differently, and he's joined me with this production. So he once he gets into the studio to record the drums for this album, I have several other things I have to do with it still, but it's very promising. I think it's gonna be my But, hopefully you guys enjoy it. Whoever has the time to music, that hopefully will be uplifting to them. I'm pretty sure that you guys will enjoy it. So keep an eye out for it, and thanks for asking there, Bill.
Man, if it's anything like your past albums, I'm sure it'll bless all of us. So we're gonna.
Thanks, man.
Cool.
You have to say that. You're my friend. Come on.
No, but I genuinely like it. I'm also someone that writes music and plays guitar, so I would be brutally honest with you. I think your perfectionism definitely comes out in your music as well. So, Bill, yes, I'm picking that back up this week and finishing up more chapters in Matthew. And then I think we have one last question here. Christopher Gomez that said, "Do y'all like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs?" I like them, but Reuben's scene was a little off, and with Bill Hann's scene, and then consider chapter 5. Yeah, that we probably will be doing some tests. We did in season 2. We did the Testament of Levi, and we did 3 or 4 episodes with a guest on that book as well. So check out season 2. But yeah, we will get back to the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs as well, brother. So I don't have anything else for this episode. Ken?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this broadcast, Honor of Kings, if the Father wills it, we'll go until our hairs are gray and falling out. So as long as we have a platform, and I know Lighthouse is coming out, and we're excited for that. And, if the Father wills it, we'll just continue this show, because we know that it's important. People like it. And it's better than rotting your mind with other stuff that Satan is trying to put into people's heads. So
that's for sure. That's for sure. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And we hope to see you here next week for episode 3 of season 3 here on Honor of King.